I spent 11 years behind a John Deere parts counter, and there was one piece of software on that counter I was never allowed to hand you. You could own the tractor outright. You could have the title in a drawer at home, the machine parked in your own shed, your own ground under the tires. And there was still one green diagnostic laptop plugged in behind that counter that decided whether your combine ran in October or sat in the yard. For 20 years, that laptop was the whole game. A farmer would haul a good running machine 40 miles on a trailer because a sensor threw a code, and the only tool on earth that could clear that code sat behind glass at the dealership. This summer, John Deere agreed to give that tool up to every farmer, to every independent shop, for 10 years. It was not a man with a wrench who forced that, and it was not some jailbreak off a forum. It was the Federal Trade Commission and 5 state attorneys general, and the order they filed against Deere in a federal courthouse in Rockford, Illinois, is the closest thing to a real win this fight has produced in a decade. We are going to walk through exactly what Deere gave up, what it still gets to keep, and the one farmer standing up in court right now saying it is not nearly enough. Here is the number that matters. For 10 years, Deere has to give farmers and independent mechanics the exact same repair software it gives its own dealers. That means reading fault codes, clearing fault codes, and pairing a new part to the machine so the computer actually accepts it. It means pulling a tractor out of what the trade calls limp mode, the emissions lockout that drops a 300 horsepower machine down to a crawl until a dealer plugs in. Until this summer, every one of those jobs ran through a Deere dealership on Deere's schedule at Deere's price. The tool that does all of it is called Service Advisor, and Deere built it so that only a green laptop at an authorized store could run the full version. That is the wall that just came down. And that wall is the entire reason farmers have been buying old iron and writing their own refit kits for years. Let me say one thing, and then I will not bring it up again. I spent 11 years behind a dealer parts counter before I went back to farming full-time, and I put everything I learned about how to fix your own machine without waiting on a dealer into a manual called the Equipment Freedom Manual. It is at getacheron.com, and the link is in the description and the pinned comment. If you want it, it is there. That is all. Now let me back up, because to understand what Deere lost, you have to understand what Deere built. Sometime in the last 20 years, a John Deere tractor stopped being a machine and started being a machine with a gatekeeper. The engine control unit, the small computer that governs the engine and the emission system, throws a code the second something reads wrong. A sensor, a valve, a filter. On a 1990 Deere, you cleared that yourself with a manual and a socket set. On a modern 8R, the code locks the machine down, and only the dealer's software can talk to the control unit and let it go. So the farmer who owns the tractor, free and clear, cannot legally get his own property running without paying the one company that sold it to him. The people who designed that system were not the engineers in the shop in Waterloo, Iowa. They were the finance and strategy layer, the executives who look at a parts and service department and see the highest margin business in the entire company. A new tractor is a thin margin sale. Parts and service is where the real money lives, year after year, for the life of the machine. If you can make sure every repair has to come back through your dealer, you have turned a one-time sale into a 30-year subscription. That is not a conspiracy theory. The Federal Trade Commission wrote it into a formal complaint in January of last year, and the word they used was monopoly. Deere, they argued, had unlawfully built and defended a monopoly over the repair of its own equipment, and farmers paid for it in higher prices and longer waits every harvest. And harvest is the pressure point. A combine does not break in February. It breaks in October, with rain in the forecast and a crop standing in the field and a narrow window to get it out. That is when a farmer discovers that the machine he owns will not run, and the nearest dealer technician is booked 3 days deep. 3 days in October is not an inconvenience. 3 days in October is money off the top of the whole year. The people in Moline who ran the numbers knew exactly how much a locked machine is worth to them in the middle of a wet harvest. That grip on a farmer's worst week is what they were selling. And a viewer of this channel put the whole thing better than any executive ever could. When harvest time comes, no one can afford a product they cannot fix by themselves. If you take one line from this channel, take that one, and subscribe so more farmers hear this. You paid for the machine. You ought to know who can shut it off. So what exactly did Deere agree to, and why now? Start with the shape of the deal. This past July, the Federal Trade Commission, together with the Attorneys General of Illinois, Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, announced that Deere had settled the case. The Commission voted for it unanimously. The terms are specific, and they are not vague promises. For 10 years, Deere has to make its full repair software and diagnostic tools available to any equipment owner and any independent shop on what the order calls fair and reasonable terms. It cannot price the tools out of reach to get around the rule. It cannot hold back a capability from farmers that it hands its own dealers. And if Deere rolls out some new diagnostic tool to more than half of its dealer network in the future, it is legally required to release that same tool to independent shops too. The door does not just open once, it is bolted open for a decade. Picture what that actually changes on a real farm. A farmer runs an 8R with a bad sensor. The engine control unit throws a code and drops the machine into limp mode in the middle of planting. Before this summer, that farmer calls the dealer, waits for an opening, loses a day or two of the narrowest window of his year, and pays a bill to have a technician plug in a laptop and type a command that takes 90 seconds. After this summer, that same farmer, or the independent shop in his own town, can own the tool that types that command. The 90-second fix stops costing him 2 days and a service call. Multiply that across every locked machine on every farm in the Corn Belt, and you start to see the size of what just changed. Then there is the part Deere will never put in an advertisement. The order includes an anti-retaliation clause. A Deere dealer is now barred from punishing a customer for choosing to fix his own machine or take it to an independent mechanic. Think about why a clause like that has to exist in writing. It exists because the relationship between a farmer and his dealer had gotten to the point where a farmer was afraid that repairing his own tractor would cost him his place in line for parts, or his trade-in value, or his standing when the next machine came up. The government had to write it down that your dealer cannot hold your independence against you. That tells you everything about which way the power ran before this summer. And here is where I will tell you something I saw with my own eyes, because I lived on the other side of that counter. Long before any of this reached a courtroom, I watched the service department change from a place that helped farmers into a place that managed them. When I started, a service manager was a mechanic who had come up through the shop, a man who would walk a farmer through a fix over the phone for free because that farmer had bought machines from us since before I was hired. By the time I left, the service manager answered to a regional number, and that number did not care about the farmer on the phone. It cared about billable hours and captured repairs. The same customer who used to get 5 minutes of free advice was now a work order. Nobody announced that change. There was no memo. It just happened, 1 quarter at a time, until the counter I stood behind was no longer on the farmer's side. When I read the anti-retaliation clause in this settlement, I did not read it as legal language. I read it as a description of the exact thing I watched take over that dealership. Now the money. This settlement is actually the second time Deere has paid this year for the same behavior. Back in the spring, Deere agreed to pay $99 million to settle a separate class action brought by farmers who had already paid for these repairs going back to the start of 2018. If a judge approves it, roughly 200,000 customers who bought repair service on large Deere equipment since then could be owed money back. And to settle the government's case on top of that, Deere agreed to pay the 5 states $1 million just to cover their legal costs. Deere denies it did anything wrong. It says the deal reinforces its long commitment to customer repair. A farmer who has waited 3 days in October for a dealer to clear one code might read that statement a little differently. And if you are wondering why it took a federal lawsuit to get here, understand that Deere already tried to make this problem go away quietly. Back in the start of 2023, Deere signed a voluntary handshake deal with the Farm Bureau, promising farmers access to tools and manuals, promising to fix the whole thing on its own. It sounds familiar because it is the same kind of promise a lot of companies make when they want to keep the government out of their business. That promise was hollow enough that 1 year later, the Federal Trade Commission sued Deere anyway. The lesson the whole industry just learned is that a voluntary promise from an equipment maker is worth almost nothing until a court stands behind it. That is the difference between what Deere offered in 2023 and what Deere just got forced to sign. Here is why this matters far beyond one tractor company. What Deere just agreed to is the first time the federal government has forced a farm equipment maker to open software it locked under antitrust law and made it stick with a decade of oversight and compliance reports. That is a template. And the industries watching it are not in agriculture at all. Look at what happened with cars. For years, the automakers ran the same play Deere ran. The diagnostic port under your dashboard spoke a language only the dealer's scanner could fully read, and independent garages fought for years to get real access. The car repair world has been at war over this exact question for 2 decades. Now the independent auto dealers are openly pointing at the Deere settlement in their own push in Washington. The tractor case gave them a precedent, a real one, where a regulator said out loud that using software to trap the repair market is not clever business, it is monopoly conduct. Look at Apple. For years, if you cracked your own iPhone screen and swapped in a new one, the phone would flash a warning or disable a feature because the part was not paired by Apple. That is the same pairing lock Deere used, the same idea that the company that sold you the device still controls the device after the sale. The pressure that finally cracked Apple open on repair is the same pressure that just cracked Deere. It is the same fight, in a different color. And the pressure is not stopping at a settlement. There is a bill in the Senate right now, the Freedom for Agriculture Repair and Maintenance Act, that would force every farm equipment maker, not just Deere, to give farmers fair access to repair tools. Right to repair used to be a fringe cause. It is now a mainstream small business issue. The National Federation of Independent Business says nearly 9 in 10 of its members back right to repair, and it has made the issue a top priority for this year. That is the tell. When the small business lobby, the farm groups, and a federal regulator all line up on the same side against one company's software lock, the lock does not survive. Deere did not settle because it suddenly loved independent mechanics. Deere settled because it read the same writing on the wall that everyone else did, and it decided a 10-year deal on its own terms beat a federal law written by somebody in the Senate who does not answer to Deere. And that is the through line the whole thing rests on. A machine you bought and paid for is either yours or it is not. If the maker can reach into it after the sale and decide whether it runs, you did not buy a machine. You bought a long and expensive permission slip. Farmers understood this before Silicon Valley did, because a farmer feels it the day his combine locks in a wet field and the dealer is 3 days out. The rest of the country is only now catching up to what a corn grower in Minnesota has known for 10 years. So what does a farmer actually do with this win? In the near term, the honest answer is that it takes time to reach the shop floor. Deere has to build the access, publish the tools, and set the terms. Independent shop networks have already said they will be watching to make sure the software that shows up is the real thing and not a stripped-down version. But the direction has changed. For the first time, an independent mechanic in a farm town has a legal right to the same diagnostic tool the dealer 40 miles away has been guarding. A farmer no longer has to choose between a 3-day wait and buying a machine old enough to have no computer at all. The refit kit crowd, the old iron crowd, the operators who have spent years ripping computers out just to stay independent, they were not paranoid. They were early. And this settlement is the system admitting, in writing, that they were right the whole time. That is the vindication. Now, here is the part where I have to be honest with you about how far it actually goes, because my own title on this video is stronger than the truth. Start with the number that cuts against my own headline. As I am recording this, no judge has signed a thing. The settlement is agreed, the commission voted for it, but it still has to clear a fairness hearing in that Rockford courtroom, and that hearing is set for the 29th of October. Until Judge Ian Johnston approves it, the 10-year rule is a proposal, not law. I called this a win, and I believe it is one, but it is a win that a court still has to sign, and not everyone thinks it is enough. One of the original plaintiffs, a corn and soybean farmer from Missouri named Jared Wilson, is planning to stand up in court and object. His lawyers call the $99 million payout a slap on the wrist. Their argument is that the attorneys may walk away with most of that money, leaving the 200,000 farmers who were actually overcharged with only a fraction of what they paid. He is not wrong to worry. A settlement that looks huge in a headline can shrink to almost nothing by the time it reaches the man who was harmed. There is also this. Deere admitted no wrongdoing. It gets to sign this deal and keep saying it did nothing wrong, and for a lot of farmers who lived through years of locked machines, that stings more than the money. So let me take you back behind that counter one more time. 11 years I stood there, and every one of those years there was a piece of software at my back that I could not legally hand to the farmer standing in front of me, even when he owned the machine outright, even when I knew exactly which code to clear and how. That was the line. On one side, the man who owned the tractor. On the other side, the green laptop that owned the tractor's permission. For 20 years, the laptop won that standoff every single time. This summer, for the first time, the man who owns the tractor won. Not because he found a workaround, and not because Deere had a change of heart, but because a federal regulator finally called the lock what it was. It is not law yet. A judge in Rockford still has to sign it, and a farmer from Missouri is still fighting to make it bigger. But the wall I stood in front of for 11 years has a crack in it now, and the crack runs the length of the whole industry. A farmer is supposed to know exactly what he bought. For the first time in a long time, the paperwork finally agrees.